Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to another meeting of the Research Triangle PowerShell User Group. My name is Mike Kanakis, and today is November 15th. And tonight we're going to be talking about filtering data from Active Directory and generating reports. Myself, along with my co-host, Bill Bossman here, we're going to be showing you some examples of things that we kind of do at work on a regular basis. We know that people that deal with Active Directory have a wide range of skill sets. And so we're going to start with some of the basic stuff, and we'll work up to a little bit more challenging concepts. But this is interactive for the people that are joined in the teams today. We'll do some examples, but we are hoping and actually planning on someone saying, I didn't understand that. Could you go over that a little bit? Or this is what I'm trying to do. How would I do that? And so we're not going to run through 50 examples tonight. We'll probably do 5, maybe 8. And the thought process is that those examples will hopefully develop a little bit of a discussion, and we can look around ways that you can optimize and pull data with Active Directory. So with that being said, I guess we can get started with some basic stuff here. And so for the people watching at home, what we've done is we've published an Active Directory domain inside of VM in the Azure cloud. So we're not talking to Azure AD directly. We are talking to a domain controller that just happens to be living in the Azure cloud. And so we're going to be using normal Active Directory commandlets. And any code that you see in here will probably be gone by the time you see this, this lab on YouTube. The commandlets will work at home, but the credentials and the server endpoint will probably be gone. So just keep that in mind. But so what we're doing is we're playing with basically Active Directory user objects today. And so we're going to start with some basic stuff. To give you some background, we have an AD domain with about 5,500 user objects in it. And there's all the standard information that you would normally see in an Active Directory domain. That's going to be users. There's some OUs. People have data published about them. They have a SAM account name, they have a first and a last name, they have a display name, they have some extension attribute data for some custom stuff. We have department, we have title, we have manager. And so we're going to play around and do some different combinations of that stuff and see how to pull data and then eventually dump that data out to things like Excel or to a CSV. And so I can start if you want.
Go ahead.
All right, so why don't we just, I was going to start at a particular point, and I think maybe what I want to do is lead up to that. And so let's do some basic stuff. So I guess I got to share. I don't think I'm sharing my screen. And so I'm just going to remind the guys and girls that are attending, Phil and I are kind of doing this live and figuring out what we want to do as we do it based on feedback or questions. So please, I want everybody to feel encouraged and welcome to ask questions, whether they're super simple or super advanced. We'll try to do our best to answer them and go from there. And honestly, the questions that you guys ask or the feedback we get will sort of shape where we head with the demos. And we'll just take it from there. So let's do some basic stuff. So I would assume everybody knows that getAdUser is our default commandlet for pulling that user data. And so I can do a commandlet. I can use the filter parameter to say, hey, I want to find things that match a query. And so in this case, I would just want to say star. Okay, and that's going to pull back all the data in the directory. Now, for our lab tonight, no one using this lab is actually domain joined. So that means every time we do a query, we have to enter credentials and a server parameter. Normally, you wouldn't need to do that if you're domain joined. You should be able to query Active Directory with just getAdUser filter star. As a matter of fact, I think that's going to work for me because, yeah, I'm still on my work domain, and I probably don't want to do that again. So, okay, so getAdUser filter star pulls back data. For my case, I need to pull in 2 extra parameters. And so I've saved those to variables. I need a server name to connect to, and I need a credential. And so just So what everybody understands, AZ Lab is just the name of a public endpoint in Azure, and what do we call it? Lab cred.
Mhm.
Lab cred is a PS credential object that consists of a username RTPSUG-user and a secure string for a password. And so we just save those to variables so we don't have to retype them every time. So if I want to just say get AD user, filter star, and then I save those on my clipboard just so I can paste that. And what I'm going to do here, since there's 5,000 objects, I'm just going to say select first, done. And let's just do that. And so there we go. We have some data that comes back from our domain. All right. And just covering a couple of the basics. If I go here and I want to look up this user, for example. Okay, so I pull back some data on a particular user. And since we're just covering the very basics, you'll see there's 10 fields that are included here. Those are not the only fields included in Active Directory. That's just the default view that PowerShell has determined is what is going to be the everyday use view of the data that's returned. So, doesn't this one have a use principle? Does none of them have user principal names?
There should definitely be a user principal name.
Just one more. I just grabbed a random one, so who knows? So if I wanted to see all the properties, I would just add the properties parameter. And I could say, I could name a property I want to add, like department. And that should add department to the view. So now I have 11 in this view. Or I could mention multiple ones. That'll increase the view here. Or I could be a little bit more like generalized and say, give me all the properties. And so I'm going to use the more switch here to just make them not scroll off the screen. And so what you're going to see here is for every user, there's about 110 fields in Active Directory. And so what we're going to do tonight is just pull some of the data from those fields and see what we can figure out. So I can do things. I can say, hey, like I can pick some data in here like city. And I can say, let's pick this one for here. I can say get AD user. I'm going to go back up here. And so let's say I want to find all the users that are in the city of Gaithersburg. And so to do that, I use the filter parameter. And in the filter parameter, I would state the name of the field that I want to filter for. And then I need to put some sort of qualifier. That would be something like equals, greater than or equal to, like, contains, match, depending on the scenario that you're looking at. So in this case, we're going to say equals. And I'm going to paste in the name of the city that I'm looking for. And so if I have any clue here, I should get some results back. Okay, so what we got here, and I'm going to pipe this out to in here so we can just see what we got going on here. So we could see here, we got these users. It looks like we got 5 hits. And if we find the city field, what happened? I'm wondering how that matched since I didn't get that. Oh, I didn't put a property in for that. Let's try that again. Here we go, city. Did it show up in the other one as well? No, okay. So I just popped this out to an interactive window called Grid View. And you can see over here, we have this field called Gaithersburg. Okay, so now let's see if we can find something interesting in here that we can use as a filter. So what else we got? So, I didn't pick any of the fields. So let's do this. Let's get a little more data. Let's be a little greedy and say, give me all the fields, but only match on Gaithersburg. And so if we pop that up just into a window, let's see what we have here. So now I have quite a bit more fields to look at. And so if I look at this, let's take a look at what we have in titles and managers and departments. And so these fields are in alphabetical order in this view here. So department, I'm just going to scroll over here. Let's find. All right, so I really was looking for 2. What else we got? Manager. Of course, it's so randomized. This I only picked 5 and there's no matches. Watch. Okay, member.
What are we looking for?
I
Sorry.
was looking for 2 that would match on a city or a department or a title. And of course, out of the 5 I had here, none of them.
Because you just chose from
I
there.
just picked random. Yeah, let me try a different city. So let's do this. All right, so I just picked another 20 users. Let's see what we got here. So, give the names, city. Oh, that's good. City. Of course, no freaking match. All right, let's do this. Let's pick the city of Bowie and the city of Palmdale. So if I wanted to, in a previous search, what you see on the screen here, I did a search and I said, show me all the users from the city of Gaithersburg. Now, if I wanted to say, what if I wanted to query 2 cities? So the way to do that would be, and this is a challenge that I find a lot of people have, is how to find 2 cities. Let me go with my notes for 1 second here and just see 1 second. Okay. I can say or Palmdale. Right? And so what I'm saying here now is I'm doing a search to say, hey, I want to look at the city parameter, and if the value contains Gaithersburg or Palmdale, I'd like to see those values. And I have no idea what I'm going to get. Let's take a quick look.
You don't need to specify city again.
Thank you.
I thought it was a new feature in this
Yep. Thank
Visual
you, sir.
Studio.
Doing it on the fly, making some mistakes. All right, so we have here, there's our city field. So here we have found all the users that are either in Palmdale or Gaithersburg. And so I just want to stop there for a second because I find that this filter parameter is confusing for a lot of people. Does everybody understand that syntax? Any questions?
And also do not equal to
Yeah, so we,
include certain.
yeah, so there's obviously lots of variables that could go into that.
And you can make that as more complicated as you want it to be. You can wrap the whole thing in multiple ors. You can do city equals this and city equals that, and then make parentheses and kind of like that. So it is
Do a hash table match.
it is any, what's the word I'm thinking about? It's just
Some parameters.
a question at that point, or it's just a filter.
So what I thought I would do is show an example. Was there something in the chat?
No, I'm taking care of it.
Okay.
It's okay.
What I thought I would do is maybe start from that point, because the first example I had was a dual filter, and how I would sort of find data, filter that data, then sort of what I would say massage the data to make it look a little bit more appealing in the output, and then eventually take that output and send it to a report like Excel or CSV, and we can just go through there and we'll deal with any questions that we have. So I have one pre-baked already, and so this is pulling back extension attributes. And so we didn't really cover extension attributes. If you're new to AD has about 110 fields, and there are 15 fields included in there that don't have a name. They're just called extension attribute 1 through 15. And those are fields that are added by Active Directory that are basically designated for you to use whatever you want to use them for. So they're places to park additional bits of data that don't match up to whatever the pre-made fields that exist in Active Directory. And we can also extend Active Directory and add our own fields, but that's a little bit more complex. What a lot of companies will do is take some random data that they find useful for whatever their job functions are, is park that into extension attributes because that data doesn't necessarily match up. And so in the example we have here, Phil has built a lab, and he has some extension attributes that we've set up that you can see here. This Phil doesn't exist, so I'm going to take that one out. Extension attribute 2, the service accounts.
Oh,
Yeah.
no.
We're using 4 extension attributes here. And so Phil's published into those extension attributes badge number, start date or hire date, employment status. And so that's denoting whether an employee is hourly, salaried, contractor. Oh, you have service account in extension attribute 8? I didn't even see that.
Well, if there was, but I don't think I've populated any service accounts.
That's fine.
I didn't get to it.
Yeah. And extension attribute 10 is business unit. And I will just go and say that my company uses almost all 15 extension attributes. We have the most ridiculous data in there. You're going to find every company that you work with has a different use case for extension attributes. And so even though this is start date, I can't search for something called start date because there is no field called start date. The actual field name is extension attribute 7 in this case. And so in the example that I have here, I want to try to find city, all the employment types for a certain city. So what we're looking for here, so what Phil has here in extension attribute 8 is an abbreviation. So hourly salaried contractor. So H, S, or C would be in the data. And so what we want to do is find a way to say, hey, I'd like to find all the contractors that are working in the city of Geneva. And so the way to build that syntax is really an extension of what we just did in the previous example. I'm going to use a filter, and I need to do 2 filters. So the first one I chose was extension attribute 8. Then I want to be a match, an exact match, so I'm using equal. And I also want to search for city, and I want that to equal Geneva. And I combine those 2 filters with the AND parameter here. And so this isn't really the best way to do this, but I just said get all the properties back for that. And then what I'm doing is to just customize the output a little bit here. I'm only displaying the display name for a user, the extension attribute value, and the city. So if any, let's see if I can move this up a little bit here. Let's clear this out. Happen. Okay. Let's get back. Okay, so if I want to run this, so I want to run that, and so when I pull that back, I get 4 matches. And so what it did is it went and queried Active Directory, and it found 4 users that have a city of Geneva and an extension attribute of C. And so maybe this is a report that someone has asked us to populate for them to pull some data back. This is a query that I get all the time. Give me the results of a few params together. But the thing is that I know what extension attribute 8 is, but probably nobody else does. So I'd like to make this a little bit more friendly. And so the next thing that we're going to step up to here is using an expression or a calculated property. They both are the same thing, 2 different names for the same output. And so what an expression is, I'm just going to expand this here for a second. It's essentially a hash table. Okay, so if you see here, it's a name value pair. All right, and it's preceded with an @ symbol. So if I was to do a return here and separate this a little bit, this might be a little easier to read. And so we're saying, hey, I want to make a field, and I want to call it employment type, and I want the data that's going to be published into that field to match extension attribute 8. And so I'll explain this a little bit more in a second. Let me just reverse this. And so what this is doing is this is going to take extension attribute 8 here and make this be a little bit more presentable for my users. So first let's run it, and then I'll show you like sort of how it works. Okay, so what I did here is I could have done this code in line over here on the select side, select object, but that gets a little long and obtuse, so I just broke this out on a separate line and I assigned it to a variable. So I have a variable here called work type, and that's going to contain what's in my extension, what's in my expression. And then when I use getAdUser, I'm going to do that a filter extension, filter query here, and at the end, now instead of select object, display name, extension attribute 8, and city, I'm just going to change extension attribute to work type. And so when we run that whole thing here, all we've done is got the same output, but now we've gave a name to our field. Right? So that's more understandable for the person. But you know what? Even display name could be just a little bit more friendly. So we're going to extend that a little bit farther, and we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to do another extension attribute, hey man, for display name, excuse me, another expression for display name. I want that to say employee name instead of display name. So it's the same syntax here, and I didn't go into it too far, but an expression starts with an symbol, a curly brace, and then there's two values you need to publish in there: the name and the expression. The expression is the value that you want that name to be. And so for name, you could call this whatever you want. That's what's going to be displayed in the table. And expression is the value or the data that you want to pull back. So in this case, what we're doing here, there's a little bit going on that maybe you might not understand, which is the idea of the pipeline. So on line 55 here, we're running this commandlet, and the results of that commandlet are being passed right here with this pipe to what's on the right-hand side, which is select object. And so when I get the select object and I want to say, where do I get the data from? I want to basically say, this is the data that's been passed in from the left side. We call that PS item or $ underbar. That's what this represents. So this represents the item that just came across the pipeline from the left-hand side query. And so what's happening here is getAdUser filter is running that query, and it's generating a bunch of results, and then it's just streaming them out to the right side, and then the right side is processing them then. So this is saying, hey, we're gonna create an employee name, and we're gonna use whatever came from the left, a field called display name. And so when we put that all together, what we end up with is this. And so now what we've done is now we've built a little table of data that's a little bit more friendly for non-IT folks to understand. I guess we could go farther and change C to maybe say contractor, but I didn't do that. I didn't do that in the example. But that's more that we could do. And so just take a pause here. Does that make sense? Does anybody need a clarification on calculated properties, the pipeline, how we built the filter? Does that all make sense? I'll take that as a yes. All right.
Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah, look for the hands raised because that's a good way for people to interact. So
I was hoping my friend Phil would help me out there. I can't even see the chat.
Yeah, Phil, come on, man, bro. You gotta get on that. Anyway, no criticisms. My thought on the code, just as an aside, it's nothing about that, but your value for credential is different than what we've been pasting into the chat, so that when people are doing the examples, if they're trying to follow along with yours, they just need to make sure that they put in lab cred instead of your ADM cred, I think is what you had in there.
Okay, good point. Good point. And Stephen, I kind of figured that you were going to chime in and say, this is what I do. So feel free to do whatever you
Actually,
want.
when I'm looking at what you're doing, it is what I do. And so
See?
that's, AD is AD, right?
Yep.
The other thing that I put in the chat for those people that are interested is you can set PS default parameter values for get AD user for the server and credentials. I did put those in chat. So that way you don't have to add those to the end of all your commands. So if you're doing it at the command line, unlike Mike, who's already got his pre-populated in VS Code, it'll make the experience a little smoother for you.
Now, I will say one thing. What I'm telling you tonight is a little bit of a lie. If you've been to previous meetings and you've seen Stephen Judd present, I'm very much like Stephen Judd. I don't work in VS Code most times. What I usually work in is a terminal. And I build my commands up a little bit at a time. And then when I get to a commandlet that's 2 or 3 lines and starting to wrap, then I say, okay, let me take this over to VS Code and make it a little bit more pretty, because maybe at that point I want to keep it. But most of the time, I'm just fleshing this out in my console as I go. I don't use VS Code as my everyday driver for just running one-liner commands. There's nothing wrong with VS Code, but I wouldn't normally flesh out all these commands like I did here for the demo. I would just kind of bang on the keyboard and be like, oops, I made a typo. Let me back that up. Let me do it again. All right, I got this. Now I want to get something else. How would I add that through? Oh, that didn't work. Let me up arrow and backspace and figure out what I typed wrong. So that's just how I work. I've just always been working at the command line and the terminal rather than VS Code. I always go to VS Code when I want to make it sort of semi-permanent. When I want to make a script file or a function, or I want to break out the code because it's just a little bit too hard to read now. But for me, it's just easier and faster to work in the terminal. So
It's a scratch pad.
I'm going to take it as some really high praise that Mike says he works like I do.
yeah, well, listen, dude, you know what you're doing, and I want to be like you.
Yeah, and Stevie, shush.
And maybe it's better that I don't see the chat. All right, so we have a table of data. But my experience is that very few people outside of IT and very few people outside of systems actually know how to use PowerShell. So they are not going to run a query that you send them. Some people may not even know how to open up PowerShell. So what we are traditionally doing when we get requests for data is dumping that data to reports. And so my tool of choice is Excel, because that's what everybody else in the company always uses. And usually if you get the data into Excel, everybody knows how to do some trivial filtering in Excel. So you can just give them a table of data and then they can parse those results how they want as long as there's enough data. But before we do that, I'm going to jump to just, let's say you need to export this data to pull into another tool. And so probably the tool of choice for most people is probably a CSV file. I mean, you could do a JSON, you could do HTML, you could do all kinds of stuff. But I think for a lot of people, CSV just resonates. So we're going to start there. So now that I got this data that I've looked at and I've kind of massaged to the way I want, I simply can continue the trend that I've been doing where I pass it on to the next thing in the line. And so to do that, I don't have to change anything that I did. I'm running the exact same code, but now I'm just going to pipe that code to export CSV. And export CSV is just a command that's going to create a CSV file for me and do the work. The only thing that I need to give it is path, and in the path, I have my username. If you're using Windows PowerShell, you may want to say no type info. I think that's not required for PowerShell 7. I think it's by default. Now, the type info, I've never understood it. It just describes some of the data that's in there. Line 1 will be one little metadata line that is completely useless to everybody. So I've always just done no type info to eliminate that line. If you're running in PowerShell 7 like I am, you don't even need to do that line anymore. All right, so if I run that command, I've already run this command. I just want to open the file. So here's the file. I'm just using, this is an abbreviation for invoke item to just pull the file up. And I have on my machine CSV is associated with Excel. This could have been opened in Notepad or Notepad++, but this is a CSV file imported into Excel. And you can see it's just a simple little table, right? I could then save the CSV, and if I needed to distribute this to someone, they could import the data into whatever tool they're using. I could sometimes I've generated reports and I need to save the data, like a server list or something like that, and I'll dump it to a CSV, and then I could just query that CSV when I need it later, and I can do the same exact commandlet in the reverse direction. I could just do import CSV, read the file, and if the file has field names that match up to AD fields, everything's great. Any questions about that? Does that make sense? I think that's pretty simple. I am going to look at the chat because I'm curious, which is probably a mistake. Okay, so Edgar talks about using double quotes and single quotes for the filter parameter. Edgar, I'm with you on that. I started using script block curly braces only when I started getting confused between putting the double and the single quotes, and it got to be more work just to separate them. And so I often use the double quotes instead, but I just find that for the simple queries, script block, the curly braces just makes it easier for me to remember. Curly braces on the outside, and then I can use double or single quotes on the inside and not have to worry about getting myself in trouble. All right, but to follow along what we were just doing, we can do better than a CSV. There's a module in the PowerShell community called Import Excel. That module allows you to export data to Excel and import data from Excel. And so today we're just going to explore that just a little bit. The module is a fantastic module by Doug Fink. It has a very robust community behind it and a website and a Git repo that has probably 150 examples of how to use that tool. And there's many things that you can slice and dice with Export Excel. Today, we're just going to dump out some data to an Excel file and show you how we can do some simple formatting. So if I take simply the results that I had previously and I build on that, in the past, I was using export CSV. Here, I'm just switching to export Excel, which is one of the commandlets built in when you install the module. And export Excel is kind of cool in that when you don't put any parameters on it, Doug has configured the application to launch with some basic params. And so without doing anything, you'll get some basic formatting. So if I just pop this guy in here, you'll see that it auto launches the file. And without having to do anything, I just switched from export CSV to export Excel. I now get row colors. I now get headers. I get a top row bolded. And so that's pretty sweet, right? So I can then save this file, save it off to a location. So this is just a temp file right now because I didn't specify a path. If I specified a path and a file name, it'd obviously be saved to that directory. But I want to see if I can go a little bit better. So let's see if we can make this code. Whoops, where did I lost my face? Okay, so let's get a little fancy. So I use Excel a lot, and so sometimes I have some params saved in my profile, so I don't have to type the same stuff over and over again. So here, I probably shouldn't have these commented out, but I do. Here are some parameters that I would normally use. So one is a table style. I'll show you that in a second. Freeze pane and some others here. And what I've done is I basically just created a little splat here that I can call in. And so what this does is save me having to type this in, because normally if I wanted to use this code here, I would have to get to the right file first of all. And I would, let me make sure I don't screw myself up here. Let's just, you know what, let's be smart. Let's just copy this so we don't screw ourselves up. I would have to specify all this stuff. And so Export Excel has quite a few parameters here that I can add. This is all the stuff that's available to me. So if I wanted to do a title, I'd have to say the title. I would call it what I want. If I want to make it bold, I have a title param. I have a param for that as well. I can change the background of it. I can do lots of different things. So rather than having to type the same stuff that I like to do over and over again, I've just created a little variable for myself that I can call through splatting. And so what I'm doing here is I'm pulling in some of my more common parameters. I'm adding a title called Geneva Contractors, and I'm going to bold that up here. So F8. And so now we got a fancy little first row here, bolded up. And so you notice I didn't have to specify the size or anything like that. In the parameters, when you say title, Doug has pre-formatted title to be a certain size. I think it's 22. All right, and I bolded it up. And so you can do lots of little customizations like this. And what this does is, my experience is that when you send a report that already has filtering and row colors and titles and worksheet names and all this jazzy stuff, people just look at you and go like, I don't know how that guy did that, but that stuff's nice. And so it just reflects on you when you give people some work that looks like this. Now, I will tell you that this first row here, I stopped using this. That's why you saw them commented out. Why would I stop using this? Well, I exported some data, a report, to an Excel file, and then I wanted to come back to that like 5 days later, and I put a title row. And then I just figured I know my stuff. I just went right to import Excel. I said, here's the file, suck it in. And I got errors, and I could not figure out. It took me like 20 minutes. I had to crack the file open, and I realized if you don't specify that there's a title row, then Excel thinks that row 2 or row 1 is where the field names are. But because I put a title row, the field names are actually in row 2. And so that screwed me up. So I just figured I'm never going to use that feature again unless someone asks for me. So what I would normally do instead is my next example. So instead of using a title and bold, I will just use a worksheet name. Right? And so just changing one parameter here. And now I have my first row with my titles, with my field names, my data, with row coloring and highlighting. Now I have a tab. And then I could append to this file, and I could have multiple tabs of multiple data. And so I also said that the row coloring, I had picked one real quick here. If you see this here, I picked medium 16. Where did I get that from? It's very simple if you're interested in this. Over here is the format as a table. And when you just simply highlight over these, you'll see the end says medium 2. The one I like is medium 16. And there's nothing challenging here. If you just count over, I believe this is the 16th table in the medium. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Maybe it doesn't work like that, but yeah. Yeah. So that's if I wanted to use this one, I would just specify medium 27 or light 17, and Excel will format that accordingly when I export that data. All right, so what we walked through there was filtering some data from AD, building some expressions, piping the data over, then customizing that output through the expressions, dumping it out to a table, and that table can exist in CSV or in Excel. That's a very common task for me. I get a lot of requests for reports, and the process I just followed with you, other than changing the values that I'm searching for or the complexity, is the process I follow probably twice a week for requests for data. Is there any questions about that? Anything that didn't make sense or something we can expand upon? All right. I'll break here if you want to take over. You want to try doing something. So I'm going to give Phil a crack at doing some demos. Steven's got questions. I see the hand, Steven.
Heck yeah, man.
What's up?
I love it. So one of the things that I used to do a lot in AD, since I don't work in that anymore, was one of my favorite fields that's in AD is manager. So I don't know if you guys have done anything with the manager field, but if you've got your Active Directory hierarchy set up properly, then any given FTE should have a manager marked in there somehow. And so you can do things like show me all the people that report to this manager.
Yep.
And that's really useful. And especially if someone comes and says, hey, we need to know how many people report to so-and-so because we're going to set up a meeting and we need to know how many blah, blah, blah to allocate for all these people. You may not know that straight away. So you go into Get AD User and you go find who that is. And you just do recursive lookup through the manager field to find out who all has that manager. And if they have a manager underneath that, you can just kind of work your way through the tree.
So you bring up something I did want to mention. So AD does keep track of hierarchy. So who you report to and who reports to you. And so that's queryable. But one of the things that is interesting that Stephen brought up is that when I do a lookup here of a user, this person is given wing foreman. Okay. You see, I pulled back the manager property, right? But the manager property does not come back as a probably like a friendly name. It comes back as the distinguished name of another object in AD. And so this is also a thing that I deal with a lot. So I would say like select SAM account name, display name, and then I want to format that manager name so that it's usable to me. And I will tell you that I screw this code up every week. So I just saved that. So I have some manager lookups that I've saved here that I don't have to try to remember the syntax. And so the tool I'm using is a tool called Ditto. It's a clipboard manager. I know in Windows 11, it has a clipboard manager built in, but this was pre-Windows 11. I love this tool. What I do is I save code snippets that I want to use all the time. I know vscode has the same function, but by saving in a clipboard manager, my snippets are now cross application, right? Because they're in a third-party tool. So I just put common code snippets that I use all the time, so I don't have to try to remember the syntax. So I have a couple of in here. So this one is to pull back the manager's email address, and this one is to pull back their name. So let's just do this one, right? And so you see here, what I'm doing is a calculator property again, and I'm naming the field manager a friendly name. And what I'm doing is essentially this data here is pointing back to an object. And so when we come across the pipeline here with the data lookup, we're going this way now, right? So here I'm doing a select object and I'm saying, give me these fields. But now I'm going to do a field. And essentially what I'm doing is, hey, go back to Active Directory and look up that object, give me the manager, and for that object, get the manager's name, right? And so there's a couple of little brackets and curly braces in there that give me a challenge every time I do it. So that's why I save it. And so, wah, wah. Maybe that object doesn't have a name. Let's try Sam. Oh. This is the count problem. So this is a lab problem only. I'm going back to Get AD User. I need to put my lab, my server, and my credential back in on the other side of the pipe.
Well, in your case, but I used the default parameter,
Yeah,
and then it would have given it to you.
Yeah, so that's why I'm getting burned on that right now. And I just don't know how to type correctly.
So that's why I set the default parameter.
What did I do here? Oh, it's in the wrong spot.
All right.
Let's put this up here. Why didn't display name come in? Oh, because I don't have it in the original.
How are we doing code?
You can take over. My machine's locked up anyway. So, but see here, we don't have full names in this thing here. Pull back name, and name is a badge number.
Well, it's just what the
Okay.
default was.
Yeah.
And at first I thought about trying to create SAM account names across it,
Yeah.
but there's so much false data. There's 5,000 records. It was too hard to come up with semblance of a. Here, I'll just do my thing. You're good.
Come on. Yeah. All right. You take it.
All right, I'm gonna take over at this
Yeah.
point.
All right.
So some of what Mike was talking about before is that, hey, you can use these wildcards, create stuff inside of the lab. So hey, attribute 7, which is something that we kind of talked about, which was so attribute 7, which is hey, hire date. Hey, give me anybody that hey, people who hired in September or in 2023. It'll come back and give you some data. Those are all the people with those properties in that point. So that's one way to do it. Or you can actually go the kind of slightly different way. And so what I actually did is I created a date object. Actually, I created a data object that is 21 days in the past. Get today's date, add days, -21, minus 21 days ago. Create it in the format that's actually in this property. So that's what these are. And then get AD user. And I'm saying a attribute 7 is all the salaried employees. So using that property, go get those properties, and then where the extension attribute is greater than, actually it's less than, we want to do less than, was less than the before date. So you can use some funky, called funky, but this is PowerShell. So the same flow that you know for other things can be used for other things, right? So there's 1,400 people who were hired before that date. Granted, I just randomly created some dates and threw that in there. So of that, you know what, actually, let's see what's greater than. So how many are on the other side? Salaried employees before the randomization came along and gave us some employees, or after that, and I guess it would have come all out. It would have, so 306 would have come there. So I think the value here is to understanding some of, hey, properties. You can do some filtering of those properties. You can even throw it into something called measure, which actually just is measure object, not measure command. So it's just whatever you come in there, it's just going to measure how many you have of that. And so all I want to know is, hey, I got a count. You can do some other stuff with it, but it really doesn't matter. You can look that up later on. So the idea is that you can build upon what you're looking for. And I think Mike thinks I'm a savage because I understand what LDAP filters are. So a lot of people look with LDAP. You can use filters, but I actually like LDAP filters. The reason I like LDAP filters is it takes wildcards. Hell yeah. I know how to build a wildcard, right? I can say, give me everybody whose username is WA star, right? I want everybody's with their first name is WA star. And so LDAP filters are not that hard. It's just a string and everything's wrapped in parentheses. So I know the property, I wrap the whole thing in properties. So, and everything's in this one's a little more complicated. We're gonna run this, and we're gonna kind of see what this looks like. This is LDAP filtering, right? Same kind of things. So we get so let's look, it goes from the inside out, right? So where the given name, okay, well, actually, it's actually outside in. So this is and. So I'm going to start with the filter. I'm going to say and. So what's inside of it? And where the given name is WA, and the title is Star Manager. So give me everybody who starts with WA, and then the last part is manager. So these are all the managers in this list I have before. So the exact same query, but now I did and, right? Or I could just use the other filter, like here, or that, and we're going to run that one. So where this is now everybody who starts with WA or starts with Smith. Actually, you know what? Let me say sir. I want the surname. I meant to do surname, not that one. So I want everybody who starts with WA and ends surname is Smith. So I should get some Smiths in here too. There's no Smiths? Let's say Joe. I didn't even think to kind of run these before. I was just building them on the fly. What do we got? Why did we break something? There it is. You get any Joneses? Is it or? I think that's or. No, I think it's or. But ultimately, here's kind of the magic in which I use. I've actually created a couple functions internally for myself that I can process. So I can just say Joe, and there's all the Johns, right? Or I can run the whole thing again, and I can just say I got a bunch of Johns, and I can say Joe. I deleted my code. F8, run my code. Joe, star. I can use stars in the code itself. So now the Josiahs and the Joys and Josephs and Josephines, that kind of thing. So you can go through all that kind of stuff. We'll go for 4. One of the other kind of funky things that I do also when I'm doing some filtering at that point is I will go and query some data, right? And then if you're not already using or you haven't used before, it's something called output variable, like out variable, excuse me. And so if the commandlet supports out variable, whatever you sent across the output will just be stuck into a variable for you automatically. So nope, I don't want just a piece. I want to run the whole line. So go get me all the 80 groups. And then I'm going to stick it into a variable. So typically, oh, that's the data I'm looking for. But now magically, I have this variable called groups, which is the exact same thing. I just don't need to query AD for it anymore. I can actually use it on the fly.
Yeah, so I love that out variable. So if you're used to doing $ variable name equals AD query, you would hit enter and you'd get no output, and then it would come back to a command prompt, and then you'd query your variable. Out variable is just nice because it produces the variable, but also shows you the output at the same time, which maybe isn't useful if you're querying like 2,000 objects and watching scroll by. But it is nice to there's something nice to seeing the work being done.
Yes. It doesn't jump the pipe. It's the same thing. Well, so the question is, so filter, I'm gonna say star, properties. I'm gonna kind of just do it on the fly here. Properties, canonical name. Right, and so the question is, hey, there's another commandlet called tObject. tObject again has a couple parameters to it. You can set what comes across the T into a variable. You can write it to a file path and all that kind of stuff. But what's really happening, I'm going to say var, is that it's actually going right to the pipeline after that. So it's coming out the pipeline here, but then it's doing something with it in the middle. And so 90% of the time people use tObjects for into a variable, or if you want to do file, it does the same thing. File. I don't know why it's not doing that. Yeah, file path, C Windows. Hey, write it to C folder.
And the name tObject, I always think it's literally telling you that it's like the letter T or the symbol. It's taking the stream and possibly sending it to 2 places.
Well, it's sending it to 2 places.
Right, to the screen into a file, or a screen to a whatever.
Yeah. I guess that's the. No.
Out variable doesn't. Right.
Out variable sets it to a variable and keeps on going. Export CSV. Pass-through just says take what you have, and the commandlet itself has to output something. And so out variable takes whatever you're outputting and sends into a variable. So it's kind of.
They're all similar.
They
and give you different choices. Like out variable only produces a variable. tObject is a variable, and you can pick a location.
Yeah. And
pass-through is just generating output. But they're all kind of doing similar stuff.
Yeah.
But each one gives you different options.
Yeah. Pass-through just sends something out to the output, to the standard output for this commandlet. So now the thing is with that typically makes the assumption that the commandlet also has the option to output nothing. And so pass-through is to say, I'm not gonna output. I'm gonna do some work and just do some work. But if you also want to get some data output, well, then you say output, pass through. So kind of like, like like let me say groups out grid view. Its default is simply, hey, show me something and I have some data, right? But it doesn't send anything out. But because it also has an option to pass through, right? And so, hey, I can do this, and then I can select some stuff, and then what then I selected comes out, right? So it's in that fashion. And now we're going down a different rabbit hole. So I guess that the whole point then, what I'm kind of saying at that point is that now that we've come to this point where we get an output, we get a variable output for free, right? We can also use that variable, and I don't have to then be querying AD over and over and over and over again. But I can, as some of Mike was saying before, is, hey, go get me all the groups. All right, I want to give me the name, and then I'm going to create this variable, this other property in midline. I'm going to call it count, and I'm going to take all the members of that group and I'm going to count them, and then I'm going to format it into, and then give me the canonical name. Where do they exist in AD? So it's just one of these things where, hey, this is typically something that I do often too, or been asked often, is that, hey, give me all the, give me the groups, and then give me a count of who's in them. So this is the number of members of that group, and then just what OU they're in.
So someone was asking in the chat, what's the difference between what I did and what you did with LDAP filters? And so,
Nothing.
well, LDAP filters are fast,
Correct.
right? So that's usually the reason people use LDAP filters. The people either use LDAP filters that I know of for two reasons. One, they want to get fast return of data, or two, goddamn, they're old and they learned LDAP filters and they stuck with LDAP filters to the end.
There are some attributes, I believe, called extended attributes. You can't return them with the regular dash filter.
And there is also recursion. There is a recursive string.
You could
that
try with the locked out attribute.
Is that that's what I want. I want the recursive LDAP matching rule and chain. That's what where is it? There it is. So you can use, this is a recursive query, meaning, so what this is going to do is that give me everybody with the member of in this CN, so actually what this recursive part is. So my lab won't do this because there's no recursion. Actually, I think I can do this really quick. Let's go do this. There it is up here. It's 2. Add a group. Which group did I add?
Hit a break. Steven's got a question, and I got a comment.
Actually, let me do a quickly thing. Object types. I only want groups. Don't filter any of those.
Be quiet, Mr. Baldinger.
What's the group? Brunei. Brunei has. Remember Brunei. So groups where name equals Brunei. How do I spell Brunei?
It's E-I. Just take off the I. Just do
EI, Brunei. Okay. So actually, Brunei, select span property members, and then I'm going to measure. So Brunei only, when I pulled it first time, Brunei only had 52 members. But I'm going to run another quickly search, another query search. Let me go steal that string. I'm going to do this on the fly. Where are we? I'm gonna send it down here. Get AD group. LDAP filter. What do I want? Actually,
So while you're flushing,
Yep.
while you're flushing that out, I was just going to say, you might be wondering why LDAP filters actually exist. And so AD is somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 25 years old, and PowerShell is 10 years old, thereabouts. And so when AD was out, you had Active Directory users and computers. And I'm sure all of you know that searching in AD users' computers is very limited. So the way that you would search and do these complex searches that we're trying to do here today is through LDAP filters, ADSI edit, directory searcher, these kinds of things. And then PowerShell comes along and makes the syntax easier. But LDAP filters never went away. LDAP filters are a function of the LDAP directory and how you query data from LDAP itself. So if you have a preference for LDAP, you can use LDAP. If you have a preference for using PowerShell syntax and things like filter or where object, you can do that. Sometimes there's a benefit to using LDAP filters.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a benefit to using the PowerShell syntax. I just find it easier to read English-like code than LDAP filters. But when I watch you do the multiple filters, that doesn't seem challenging.
No.
Then you start getting into the OID stuff, and I'm like, I'm out.
Yeah.
You know, that's all just.
But a lot of that stuff
saved in a
you can
note, and
you
I
can
pull it
then
back in.
populate this into, you know, so that what's the name of the thing and just part variables at that point. So kind of what I put here is that, you know, you could do last name equals, read host. Say I was first last name. Yeah. Right. So I like this because then I can come in and say surname equals and whatever this is, last name. And so we're going to say and. So then we can run the whole thing. And then who do we have? We had John. And the last name is S. I don't know, somebody S. We didn't have any S's. Do we didn't have any S's? Doesn't matter. So the whole point is that you can build those kind of things like that. We can go from there. I think that's pretty much one of the things I wanted to talk about, some LDAP filters, and then the idea that you can then send things to variables and work with variables. So you're not crushing AD because you're doing 15 queries over and over and over and over and over again, is to hold on to the data midstream, and you can play with it after the fact, or at least get partials of it. One of the things that I oftentimes see is, hey, I want to get the AD user. I'm going to go through a group. I'm going to get me all the members of the group, and then I want to do a lookup of that user again. And sometimes it's so.
Stephen's waiting patiently to ask a wonderful question.
Go. What's the question?
Stephen.
Got a question. He's gonna crush my code.
He's probably asleep.
Yeah, no, it's all good. Yes, Stevie, I patiently wait. So I was going to comment about the T object versus out variable. So the out variable is exceptionally useful when you're doing a command and you're building a preset group, and then you're piping along into more commands. So where I wind up using that is I'll do my first command, I'll put it in an out variable, and I'll pipe that into something else where I'm building more of the object or I'm looking up other data. And what's really cool about that is your variable is already built for you, so you don't have to re-query the data. So previously where we were doing get AD group and we were pulling back users and then we were going to check their managers, we could have put the users into a variable and then queried the variable for the manager's name instead of doing another get AD user and having possibly expensive commands, one right after the other through the pipeline. That's one of the things I like to do. The other thing I wanted to point out.
Hold on one second. Hold on. That's a great example because I often find sometimes when I'm in the pipeline and I'm piping together multiple commandlets, sometimes I don't know what's sitting in $ underbar.
Yep.
Because it changes along the way. But when you have a variable, you know what was there. I kind of like that. I got to do that.
Yeah. Especially when you get to the third or fourth pipeline command, things start to get a little sketchy that far down. It's kind of like Inception. Time starts to, turn into infinity.
Yeah.
So, it's very useful to do out variable early on, get your object built, and then call it later along the pipeline. Now, if you're talking about pure speed and efficiency, there's going to be people that'll show up and be like, yeah, that's great, but since pipelines are generally interruptible based on what kind of commands you're doing, that may be affecting that. So have some caveats on performance. The other thing I wanted to say was about T-object. Like Mike mentioned, you get to run up and you get. I'm going to turn on my camera for this. So you get that T effect, right? So one side is either going to a file name or a variable, and the other side, I don't think it was very clear, but the other side goes to pipeline. So
yeah, but we are unable to
continues down the
in our FSX share part.
There's a side conversation happening. I'm getting a little confused.
Yeah, we got to figure out who that is. Try it.
Default software actually. Okay. I just informed to the Krishna, so he is asking to collect the.
All right, guys. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Oh, bump the control A or control M, whatever.
Hey,
so the point is that when you hit the T object, it continues down the success pipeline. So then you can continue. You can take the T object in the middle of, let's say you've got a bunch of commands together, and in your second command you want to capture that information. So you can capture that into a variable and then keep it going down the pipeline so that your actual output on the console is something different than what you were looking for. But then later you can go back and go, okay, well, the expensive command was this first command piped into the second command. So I don't have to run that again. But as I'm working through, kind of like Mike and I talked about earlier, is when you're working at the console, you run commands, run commands, run commands. Don't keep hammering away at your AD servers. Get your expensive command up front, pipe that into a variable, and then keep working with it.
I thought the T object, one of the defaults was to the host. Do you have to specify the host on T object?
Okay, so for those people that have been around a while and have watched my my writes right presentation, what it does is it just passes it along the pipeline. And so the very next one is out default if you don't specify anything. So T object just says, okay, keep going. And then it goes to out default, and then it hits the default formatters, and then it eventually does out host and etc. So yes, by default, it goes to the console, but that's only because every command that you ever enter by default goes to the console because it eventually hits the success stream.
Okay.
But you can take T object and do the pipe afterwards, and it'll just keep on going because it's just passing it along to the pipeline.
Hey, Dennis, I saw your comment. Dude, you're not going to get any unpopular opinions here. Phil talks about that all the time. Sometimes he doesn't want to deal with AD, and he just takes the entire directory and saves it to a variable, and then he can work with the variable for a period of time because he's not worried about the most freshest data.
Correct.
Right? And he doesn't have to deal with
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I advise a bunch of people. I do a bunch of stuff in that fashion, especially with these automation scripts, and we're adding a bunch of stuff. We're doing some lookups. Just pull AD at the very beginning of your script, get your variable, and then do all your lookups and your extra data once. So it's one query to AD, and so that single query of all my 40,000 users and give me all the properties for every single user, everything. And they go, oh, that's a heavy query, but it's going to run for 15, 30, 40, 45 seconds. And then what happens from there? Well, then you don't have to worry about it from there, right?
Yeah.
It's not doing that each time.
Store it in
What are you
memory.
laughing at?
I agree with you.
All the AD admins cried out with a voice of terror, and then were silenced.
But it's one call. It's not doing that call 15 times.
No, that's not to be like an application, that's all the time doing that. Obviously, this is
Correct.
when we're working and for our purposes, we're trying to do whatever. This is the time to pull the data, do it once and get it over with, and then it's faster for you to get your job done.
Correct.
Opinion.
And I find that that's kind of a moot point anyway, because the people that are doing it and saving it to a variable actually understand the impact they're having on the DC, as opposed to what I usually get, beginner PowerShell AD people. They're like, I need to find 2 users. Get AD user filter star, prop star against 30,000 objects.
Yeah.
And then they find the 2 things they want. I'm like, you are killing, and they'll do that repeatedly.
That didn't work. Let me try it again. Let me do it again. Let me wear this and wear that at the very end. They're like, no, filter at the beginning. Filter at the beginning. Or the filter at the beginning, or the reverse of just get all the data and then do all the freaking filtering you want later on because you understand that filter there. So yeah, it's a lot better that way. Throw it into variables, go from there.
So where are we with this stuff? Do people have questions? Did we waste our time? Was this useful? Is stuff confusing? What can we help answer before we wrap up tonight? I think you may even have more demos, but
No, I think we're good. Unless people want to
if
kind
we
of
need
talk
to-
through some stuff.
yeah, I'm just curious if we need to go back and touch on any of the stuff we sort of hit. For old school AD admins, probably the stuff we did today is probably fairly trivial or commonplace, but we felt like a lot of those things are the things that people get tripped up on and they don't understand, and just going through it once or twice might be useful to some others. Any follow-up questions that we can help people with, or things that didn't make sense?
Yeah, I had a question. Sometimes in the console output, when the row is pretty lengthy, you get 3 dots.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get around it, without just outputting that to a CSV or a file? Is there a way to still present it in a table format without those 3 dots?
Yeah, give me just a second. Let me get you some data that you can work with. So get AD user filter.
Hey, while Phil's doing this, I could use a little feedback because I see what Graham's talking about here. How was it for you guys hitting the lab? Was it speedy? I know in the room it was tough because we had the Wi-Fi issue, but
It was fast
All right.
here.
cool. Then maybe we can repeat this for other things. AD is a big topic. We could do 10 sessions on AD.
Using your example of if you wanted to search for 2 users, like the example someone was using of how they'll try to search the whole AD, is there can you show a quick dirty example of how, if you wanted to search for 2 users, just using that example?
Sure, we could do that. Let's let Phil get through the example that he was trying to do for Dimitri. And Dimitri, are you set up?
So
with that?
yeah, I'm just pulling the whole list of AD users, and then that'll give me the ability to then do almost to the other example as well. We want to just query some. So really, the point being is, where's my VS Code? Is that we were up here and we kind of went through this exercise of we're filtering here, so the filter is going to happen there, or like here, I want to get. You can even do get a. I need somebody's. What kind of things? Most of the times, this lab is just all
Random
crap
data, yeah.
crapping here. Actually, we have some usernames right
Yeah.
there. So get AD user. Per mic is name equals. Copy this one. and choose that one, right? So the idea is that the filter happens on this side of the pipeline. So the pipeline's here, and so you filter as far left as you possibly can. And so the filter happens on here, on this side, so that the only thing that the domain controller responds back with is a single, what did I do wrong with my thing? I gotta wrap them in quotes.
Yeah, you need quotes.
There you go. Right. So why did I
get AD user filter name people?
You have
and
instead of or. You probably need or.
Oh, you're right. See?
Always helpful when someone's paying attention.
Team help. Right. So I just got back 2 users. I just got back those individual users if you needed to. But to that question is, well, this might not be easy to, go to that route. So you could dynamically create this. This query is just a string effectively. And so you could go through this thing of what somebody else said is in. You could do that as well. This should also work. I don't know if I got to wrap it in an array. I think we'll find out, right? We're just thinking.
Oh, so you make like a data set?
Yeah.
And pass, and then just like query that data set.
I think it's have to make an array. Operator not supported. Did you do a dash?
Comparison operators.
I think there's a couple other things. Probably in
value isn't a collection.
Isn't a collection. There's other ways in order to substitute those. I think we have our users, right? So
Oh, here. So PDF in ABC.
Yeah, but that's not in.
So it's just following the collection.
Yeah, I tried that.
Maybe it wants.
I just posted something that I use a lot to return whatever amount of objects I need for any specific command.
So effectively,
I don't need to.
So you created a string.
Yeah. And if you have extra spaces, as I showed, it's not a problem. It's going to strip them out.
Yeah, so you can't do, actually that's what it is. It's not minus in, it's in. Is that what it is?
Now you know why we don't use that syntax.
No, it's 4G. Actually, no. So in Dimitri, you wrote this. You called AD twice. And in this fashion, I don't want to call AD twice. I don't want to call it 10 times. I want to call it once. Go get me AD user and get me each one of them. And so I think there's another filter.
Still on get AD user and the filter, it only does equals and like.
Oh, is that right?
Well, yeah, those are your only two choices.
So
it doesn't do that.
Because if it did anything else, I would be using dash match. Isn't that right, Mike?
Or you could just do
never gonna live that down.
Never.
Or you could just do.
Oh, here he goes. I'm starting to agree with Mike. You're a monster.
But to that same point, really, the whole point is that you just grab some, go from there. So,
but Ali, the question you had was, how do I filter for two people, right? So Phil did that. There's a number of different ways. The examples that I was doing in the beginning, filter this and that, it just depends how specific you want to be with your syntax. If you want to use wildcards to match parameters, and be a little vague, or if you know the actual usernames or the last names, you can just spell them out and use equals. But it's exactly what I was doing earlier with the filter with the 2 parameters. So what I essentially did in my example was city and extension attribute. So I said city equals Geneva and extension attribute like something. I could have just done username equals or username equals, and that would have worked. So the reason we kind of do this stuff is because one of the things that's interesting about AD is some people are frustrated with it because there's a lot of different ways to do things, but a lot of people like it because there's a lot of different ways to do things. And so if we queried the room, all of us probably query data in a little bit different, but we all end up with the same basic results.
Yeah. And so who's the question about the dots? So right now, here we go. We're just dropping this off the screen, right? And so effectively what this dots off the screen is doing is giving you the 3 dots from the view that you're working with. And so it's wider than your display. And so it's kind of a false sense that's there. But so if you do export CSV, no type information, hold on. C temp, do I have a temp folder? Out.csv, right? So we can kind of quickly look to see, and I think what I'm gonna get is actually gonna be because I'm doing all users.
Yeah.
It's writing out 5,000 records.
That's the junior admin pulling too much data.
Yeah. Well, at this point, I'm not hitting AD though. I'm just working. I'm just writing
cell phone connection. So next month's
all right. So
we'll finish.
Yeah. So here's also another thing. If you don't know it well, this is nothing more than an array. So I could give me the first 20. So shorthand of so it's a zero indexed array. So 0 to the 20. So give me the first 21 records. So that's a cheat. No, it's actually the first 21 records. And so you see at this point, we actually have. So, and I get some garbage because what I outputted is a table and not actually raw data. So let's go. Select. Nope, it's in use. That stupid thing's open. So some of that didn't get there. I think what you're looking for, actually, you know what? We're going to outfile it. Maybe that's going to give us a better. That may be giving.
Never mind.
Oh. That's not what I want. Let's do.
While he's typing that out, one of the things that I like to do whenever I'm exporting out file content, I'll use $env:temp because all the users should be able to write to that environment variable, and then you don't have to remember how to go find it.
So here's a good example. Hey, so we just took out what the console can do into that. That's probably what you're kind of looking for. I was trying to give you the best example of a place where I know it drops off the screen. So it assumed that the line itself was only 80 characters long. So a trick that you can go at this point is in the middle here. This is gonna format that out where it needs to go, or we can just say out the whole thing into a string, into its width, and how far do you want to go? 20, 40 character. That's a really wide line. And now I have all the data. So effectively, it tried to paint a line that was 2,048 characters long. So as far as it wants to go, it needs to go. So that's kind of a trick that you can use to extend the line as far as it needs to go.
So what really happened was it said, so what it said was make a line up to 2048, but the line itself was like 128. So it ended
Correct.
the line there.
Correct.
Or else you would have had this super long wide file if it tried to do the whole thing.
It actually gave you white space up until the longest one there was.
Yeah.
So just know that it gave you some white space. So you'd have to then potentially, but ultimately that what you got back out is in this form. And so this is a lot of white space anyway. But some people will try and output that, just write it to a file and then kind of go from there. And you'll get dotted output there. And the trick, or at least I think this is the trick that I use, excuse me, is outstring.
That's pretty close.
Huh. So, Phil, question. What happened when you did the select line? Did it ... as well?
No, because it put it in, it's the default type is a list. And so what we got is list form, right? And I think it actually would give me a ... if this was really, really long, if this was 80 characters long, if this really, if it went past there, you'd have the same problem again. But ultimately, if you get to a stage of any of these where you get a ... I just stick a outstring to it. Just make the line longer. Now there's, Sean could probably tell us, exactly why at what points it truncates automatically, but I think it's the default output.
Control minus. Zoom down.
Edgar, I know you've been waiting a long time. What's your question, buddy? While these two knuckleheads are figuring this out.
You want
It's
this?
not a question. It's more of an answer to the person that was looking for just two specific users.
Oh yeah,
there's
sure.
a filter. In filter, you can just filter through ANR and bill name resolution, and you give just partially either the first name or the last name or whatever you know, and it'll find the user.
Could you say with these two over here? I can't hear what you're saying.
Now run it again. See if it.
Let these two finish, and then we'll go through what you said, because I just want to think about what you said. What are you guys doing?
I don't know what he's so
I'm trying to see if the truncation happens when you have a wider display.
I don't think so.
Whenever you ran to get ...
Yeah, so it did. Because it takes the default. Because this can go the whole screen, and
It's not on the.
it's on the output of the. It's on the output of the screen. Whatever the console's out, effectively you at this point, if you made it really small, the viewable width of this whole thing is super, super long. So hold on, you're gonna see it in just a second.
Yeah.
Like at super, super wide. But at this point, it's super small. I'm gonna scroll back out.
It's like I got rid of the dots and I ran the query. I just can't read it.
Well, but if you're 90% of the way there.
I know.
Well, that assumes that the console in which you ran the code has it. But if you're running this in some script kind of stuff, it's going to use whatever the console, output is of whatever that console, which has been the default. And so it's harder to assume.
You two be quiet for a second, because Edgar had a good comment and I couldn't understand him. What do you say it one more time, Edgar?
So,
that was
Edgar had some code here?
No, he wanted to respond to the person with another way to do a filter for two values.
The code is it's in the chat as well. I did put it there.
I didn't see it. Sorry, I wasn't
at the
paying
top.
attention.
It was right above the one that you had highlighted.
Get out of here, Cat.
Edgar, where had something highlighted?
It's a code block. I saw it there. It's in my chat, so I know it's there. But anyway, when you're looking for specific users, best way to handle that is just use a filter, but make sure you search with an ANR property, ambivalent name resolution. That'll look at all of
ambiguous name search.
Where did my code just not show? Did you post it again?
It's right here.
I can post it.
Oh, it's 17. 807. Oh, ANR.
Yeah. ANR.
So I just did this for 2. It's going to show you quite a number of users because some of them have Zeus in either their surname, given name, or their email address if there was available. So you just give partially, like either the partial first name, partial last name, whatever you can fill out, and it'll try to filter and, refine the search as best it can. You can do this with a singular ANR search or just like I did in there, a compound search, just to know more.
I know ANR from Quest. There's always that ANR filter in the Quest products.
So I don't know if you want to get rid of this or and everything after that.
Yeah, so then this is the part you get from there. So this is everybody you come back.
ANR means ambiguous name resolution. So it's basically matching on anything that's syntax. You don't have to do the wildcards. It's essentially saying wild.
Yeah. That is, I think there's a structure in which it can be used. I mean, not only like a structure, but within AD, you have to be able to, it's a searchable property. So some parts of it are worth it.
Isn't this expensive though? Because you're looking for any string that has Zeus.
Yeah.
It can be, yes. Yes.
If your city name is Zeus, then you're thinking you're returning a user Zeus, but it's a city Zeus.
It has specific properties that it searches. I forget what they are. They're given name, surname, display name, email address, and a bunch of other stuff. I don't think it includes like the city or anything like that.
Interesting. Okay.
SAM account name, user principal name. Those are just off the top of my head. And it's optimized with an AD, ambiguous name resolution.
Yeah.
Something else to note when you're doing filters in AD is that if you are doing wildcards with your like in filter, so you're saying where display name dash like, and then you put your quotes there. If you put an asterisk or a wildcard at the beginning, it's going to be substantially slower than if you just wildcard at the end. Because of how the index is built on the AD fields. You want to try to get your first few characters, actual characters, and then wildcard at the end. Because your wildcard in the beginning, it's going to take a long time.
Yeah. And it's just part of the things you learn over time as to where you put those. And like you said, is that this can be an extensive search as to where it's looking for. And there's documentation on where it's used and when it's used. And I guess to some people's credit and questions that, hey, if you're dealing with really large data sets, you just need to be mindful and be a good citizen when you're doing those queries. Really, that's the thing. Especially these security guys who are, doing audits across the environment. Where you just give me everything. I want to find all the, users with this and with this property and just crushing it. So it can be fun. So
if you want, I can give you a quick example because I don't think it's a very much expensive cost. It comes back quite quickly.
Is it based upon the data set we have? Do you want to share?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I can share my screen.
You might have to be.
I think everybody's a presenter. We didn't lock it down today.
Are you able to see the screen? It's transparent.
Yep. Nice little lighthouse.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna look for. I'm gonna do some. I have tab expansion ++, so I'm just gonna do a quick search for it. So I'll just look for anyone named Ivy, and it finds with anything that says IVY within the all the properties in there. You can just kind of pick. There's Ivy Trevenino, Ivy Whittaker, and
Tab expansion.
somewhere in here where. Yeah.
So it's a module.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
You can also just do it like this and just type in ID. You get the same thing. That was all.
I like it.
Heck yeah.
I wonder if you can put like a stopwatch and elapsed time for this command versus just get AD user with the LDAP filter specifying a sure name for that user. What's going to be faster?
I imagine the LDAP one, but I mean, if you're just hashing this out on the terminal like I was, I think the less typing, the better.
Yeah, I mean, all these things. I mean, there's a case to be made for what Dimitri's saying and for Edgar. It's essentially what's the use case, right? Because, like I was saying earlier, and we should be wrapping it up here. It's getting late. But what I was saying earlier is like, yes, when I know exactly what I want to do and I'm writing it in VS Code and I'm making it all pretty, yeah, a lot of that makes sense. But when I'm just banging on the command prompt, just trying different things, I'm not always worried about how expensive a query is because I'm just kind of just trying to find data. I know when I'm being gross and I'm just saying filter star, prop star, or some ridiculous query. But for the most time, like we started the meeting with someone asking, how do I filter 1 million objects, right? Or something like that. And I normally wouldn't do that, even if it's doable, just because it's really not friendly to do. And so if you know you're not doing this crazy ass syntax, whether you do it Dimitri's way, Phil's way, or Edgar's, it solves the problem, right? And then we could split hairs about what's the better tool. But I can't really disagree with what Edgar's saying now. He's just building it on the fly, and his argument is it's the least typing I have to do, and it may not be the most efficient query from a CPU time, but it's the fastest one to type, and it doesn't look like it's that much more expensive that you would even consider it. So it's kind of interesting, and I like that tab extension plus plus.
Yeah, I gotta look into it some more because I do a bunch of argument completers, but that might be an interesting one.
All right, so I think we're gonna wrap it up here, and before the rest of you leave, I'm gonna ask you to stick around. We want to ask a few questions afterwards. But for the people that have been watching at home on YouTube, we appreciate you sticking it out to the end. If you've enjoyed what you watched tonight, we invite you to come and join us in person. You can find us on the web, rtpsug.com, or on Meetup. You can look for RTPSUG or Research Triangle PowerShell User Group. We meet on the first and the third Wednesday of the month. And the benefit of coming in person is you get to ask the questions and get, the direct input to what you want to find out. And so if you enjoyed what you saw tonight, check out the rest of our channel. We have about 135 videos, the last count, I believe. So if you're interested in PowerShell, we have something on a topic that you're going to be interested in. Thanks again for everyone who joined us tonight. I hope you all enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.